Okay, well, thank you for joining me, Scott. So, Scott is the moderator on our Discord here, which, if you're in the audience, I'm sure you already know. And then, in addition to that, he's also been a software developer in Japan for a while now. He's currently working remotely for a US company. And so, yeah, I want to talk to him about his experiences first coming to Japan and becoming a software developer here. And so through the Discord, I saw that you first got into programming because of MUDs. So can you maybe tell people what MUDs are and how you got involved in that?
Um, so basically, there's two ways I can explain this. One is to tell you what mud means, and the other is to just compare it to something more popular today. And mud means multi-user domain, and you can tell this was invented by programmers for programmers, with an acronym like that. It's basically World of Warcraft, but text. It's all text. You go to a location, it says, this is a forest full of towering trees. You can see roots and so on and so forth. And there's mobs. Even the word mob comes from MUDs. It's like a mobile unit. And so in the mid to late 90s, MUDs were really flourishing. People could afford to buy, small Linux instances on their own and host a MUD that could hold, 50 to 60 people if you were moderately successful. So it'd be 50 to 60 people from around the world online at the same time playing concurrently, which was a big thing in the 90s. The bigger MUDs had hundreds and hundreds of people at the time at the height of their popularity. But I got into them because of the Wheel of Time. I was just really into it, and I wanted ways to, find more people who were into it. And I got into a bunch of Wheel of Time related MUDs, and um, I must have been 12 or so when I first got into them, and I just wanted to get like I wanted to know how to do everything. I wanted to know how you made the rooms, and how to make the mobs. I wanted to know how you made items, and how you actually made the mud, and that's how I got into programming.
Okay, cool. And so then, like for your first MUD that you were programming, what language were you using?
Um, every Almost every mud I worked on was based on ROM 2.3 or 2.4, so it was all C. There were some efforts to move to Smog, named after Tolkien's dragon, and that was in C++, and it was still in its early stages at the time, so I didn't really get into that. I just stuck with C for the first 2 or 3 years or so. I was working on MUDs.
Okay, and so that was, I guess, through your high school period, and then you went to university. And what did you study there?
That was actually my junior high period. That would have been eighth and ninth grades, I believe, in the U.S. Yeah. And then high school, and then university. I initially wanted to study computer science. I initially wanted to study art, and then I wanted to study computer science, and then I ended up switching to an order. I believe it was classics, and then Greek, and then philosophy. And then I got stuck in Japanese, and I was forced to stay in Japanese and graduate, or East Asian studies, rather.
Oh,
Yes, I'm American, shit.
okay, and so yeah, you studied Japanese, which I guess naturally led you to Japan. How did you first come here?
Um, so I went to a very expensive college in the U.S. because they offered a lot of ancillary benefits, like small class sizes that I really wanted due to my because I'm actually half deaf, and so I wanted smaller class sizes where I could engage a little more and make sure I could understand what was going on in class. So I went to a relatively expensive private college in the U.S., and I graduated with a lot of debt and not very much Japanese language ability. So I didn't come to Japan because it was like my dream forever, or I really wanted to learn about, the culture, the technology. I was more like, that's a lot of zeros, and I still don't speak Japanese. I should really learn Japanese. So I just like I was just desperate to come over to Japan and learn more Japanese and make sure that my degree was actually worthwhile. Like it's a very mundane reason, but that's what brought me over.
Okay, and then what was your first job here?
I came over as a dispatch ALT. So I worked at a Hakken Geisha for 4 years. But I was an ALT for 5 years because one was directly contracted with the municipality I was in.
Okay, so you were doing that for a while, and then how did you get kind of back into software engineering as a profession?
Um, so basically, I'd done all that stuff as hobbyist in the mud sphere, the mudosphere, the sphere of mud. And I'd also done a bunch of tech related jobs while I was in university. And so that like the tech stuff from university was on my resume because they were actual jobs. And while I was in ALT here, I was still working on stuff like web design or little projects, and I had a resume up that listed that stuff. And every once in a while, people would kind of get in touch with me and be like, "Hey, I have an opportunity in Tokyo." And I was always kind of like, "I don't really want to go to Tokyo. I don't really like. I'm not really interested, and there's no details. This sounds like really, really sketchy." But eventually, there was one guy who reached out, and he sounded interesting, and he had details. And I met up with the company owner. You can see my dog. I met up with the company owner, and we had some back and forth. I ended up moving to Tokyo to work for him, and he had a. It was basically like an R&D branch for his family-owned pharmacy, and he was looking for like a very specific kind of fit that I happened to, be perfect for him, and that's how I got into it.
Like, what kind of things was he looking for that you fit?
He wanted specifically, like one of the things that kept coming up in our discussions is he wanted somebody with a liberal arts background. He had not had very good experiences with people from like the larger Japanese universities, like from Todai or Kyodai. And he wanted somebody with a liberal arts background, but also somebody who was relatively technical and curious and willing to learn about different fields and not just be like, oh, 100% C, 100%, C++. Like, I just want to program. I don't care about other things. He wanted that very broad, generalist kind of person. And also because this company was all Japanese, with the exception of one engineer from China. The daily language was Japanese, I guess is what I want to say. He wanted somebody with some level of proficiency in Japanese to make sure that they could actually work with other people in the company.
So then, were you working in Japanese exclusively there?
Yeah. Even as an ALT, I worked almost, with the exception of my classes, I worked almost exclusively in Japanese. And then when I went to his company, he was worried that it would be like a big shock. I was just kind of like, I've been working in Japanese for 5 years. And then I worked exclusively in Japanese at that company for 6 years, I want to say, until I hired somebody, an American. And then he and I spoke in English all the time. But other than that, it was all Japanese all the time with everybody. It was the kind of company that did everything by email. So it's like 600 emails a day, all in Japanese, replying entirely in Japanese. And yeah.
Well, I guess that was pretty good for your Japanese skills then, and you did make use of that degree and your Japanese ability there. Um, okay, we have a question. What's the most difficult part of working for a Japanese company directly versus through a Hakken Geisha in your experience?
Um, Thank you, Gray. I think I can approach this from two sides. One is to skip your question and say the best part of working for a Japanese company directly was that I was employed as a seishain. So the most difficult part of working for a Hakken Geisha was the lack of stability. I never knew if I had a contract coming in for the next year. So I never knew if I would actually be able to, stay employed and stay in Japan. The most difficult of working for a Japanese company directly, it was probably surprisingly the relative lack of structure. I say relative because it was still very structured compared to an American company. But at a Hakken Gaisha, they usually have like lists and lists and lists of rules. Like you can't do this, check in by this time. If you're even a minute late, you lose this bonus. Don't talk to these people. Don't say the like. There's just so many rules when you work at a Hakken Gaisha. And it was good to have that structure initially when I came to Japan because there's so much like bundled up in like is this culture? Is this like an individual problem? Is like what's going on here? So when you have the rules to fall back on, it feels better.
Okay. Do you think like maybe part of that was also the size of the Japanese company you joined, or like how big was it?
Um, it was. It depends on how you want to look at it. Um, the entire company, and I said it was a family-owned pharmacy chain, and the entire company, including all the pharmacists and all the assistants and everybody, was a little over 100 people, I think. The R&D side was probably at the max around 20 people. Like these numbers fluctuated over time depending on different things. But it was small, I guess. Like it's small enough you know everybody's name and everybody's face, essentially. Like the cast of Cheers.
Okay, cool. And so you were working there for a while, and then you uh, s- changed companies. You're no longer working for them. So why did you decide to move on?
Um, it was even it was essentially like a startup kind of environment where you were cranking out new products, so you're working on new products and trying to get profitable in that company. And so salary was pretty stagnant. I hadn't gotten a raise for like 7 years, for example. Japan doesn't really do inflationary raises because there isn't really inflation here. I didn't really get, performance raises or age-based raises because it was a non-traditional company. And so I wasn't really happy with that. And we weren't, I want to be careful how I say this, burning bridges and so on, but we were not, I did not see a future where I would get a raise. Um, and so that was my primary motivator at that point. One of them. Another one was, work environment and stuff, and just the feeling that if I had continued to stay in the place for much longer, I stayed 11 years. That's a lot of time by anybody's standards. If I stayed there much longer, I would become increasingly unemployable. That was a big worry. So salary, and wanting to continue to be employable and learn new things were my big motivators in trying to find a new job there.
Mm. So we have another question. What's the average increment in Japanese versus international companies? I'm not.
Um, you want to say something about that?
You can go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's in many ways it's a loaded question, right? Uh, Especially without knowing what country you're from or comparing to. But I would say the average increment in Japan is extremely low. It's actually probably better at traditional companies where they do age bracketing because then you're at least guaranteed to get something as long as you age, right? For better or for worse. It's not very high. I would say it's like, in my experience, from what I've heard from people, it's like 1 to 2%, maybe 3%. It's not a huge number.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really have much to compare it to, but yeah, I think the easiest way to get a big raise in Japan is to change companies. It's a shame that there was no promotion or anything at that company. When I was working for the one Japanese company I did work for, I did get a raise after like 1 year or so. But soon after that, the company was having financial troubles. And so they asked everyone to lower their salary. And so, like, my salary went up and then it went back down. Um, so yeah, you were looking for a new company. Were you specifically looking for an international, like outside of Japan company, or were you looking domestically as well? Or
Um, I was not necessarily looking for. I didn't go into it with the mindset of like I don't want to work for a Japanese company. I know some people do that. What I specifically wanted to find was a I kind of lied. I said salary and wanting to grow professionally were two of my biggest motivators. My other biggest motivator was I really wanted a company that had a great environment for DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a relatively new thing, especially in Japan. And so I wanted a company that had not only like on their homepage, like we support DEI. This is what we do for, minorities and for women and to support people with children and people with disabilities. I wanted not only that, but a company that actually had like a proven track record where I could like go talk to some employees and be like, hey, what was your experience like? Were they actually supportive? Was it, do they walk the walk? And that was one of my biggest motivators. And unfortunately, it meant that I was mostly applying to international companies. That's where the Japanese software industry is right now.
Okay, and I guess by this time you had gained permanent residency in Japan. No?
I still don't have
Oh,
permanent
you don't
residency. It
have
was
it.
never very high on my list. It was not high on my list. I just applied 7 months ago. I applied for it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, now I'm remembering. So because of that, you went through an employer of record company,
Yes,
and
I
so
did.
I guess this was the first time working from Japan for an international company, and so like, how did you even know that was a thing? Or
Um, so the way that ended up working out was somebody from my current company, the CTO, reached out to me by email, and he was just talking to me. He's like, "Oh yeah, I've been to Japan. The CEO's been to Japan. We love it. You look like a great fit, but we don't have any presence in Japan. We have no idea how to hire there." Um, and because I was still on the job hunt, I was like, I kind of like to get hired at this point. So I went out, I just started Googling things. I'm like, how can you get hired in Japan? What's it like working for an international company? Do you start your own branch? Like, and so on and so forth. I did a lot of research on that, and I went back to him and I was like, here's the options. And I talked to like people who'd done this before and stuff, who had started their own branch companies and stuff. Um, and I went back to him. I'm like, here's some options. This is what they cost. This is like here's the breakdown. Because they say don't bring people problems, bring them solutions. And one of those options was the EER, go global. Um, and that's why he actually ended up hiring me because I did that because I brought him the options. And he's like, "Oh, the ER thing sounds easier. Let's go with that. Let's hire you." I didn't know it was going to be that easy. Boom. So,
yeah, I guess that was like going back to demonstrating your soft skills that you've kind of acquired there, which I think a lot of people are asking, how do you improve your hireability? And a lot of it is more those kind of skills and being able to demonstrate you're a good communicator and take initiative and stuff like that, rather than just pure technical skills. So, okay, a question. How did you put yourself out there for the job search?
I didn't actually. I don't really like that. I think there is a very bad signal to noise ratio for, putting yourself out there. You get a lot of stuff you don't necessarily want, which is the nature of putting yourself out there. So what I ended up doing was I went through my friend network. I went through my friend network, my professional network. I went through sites of, companies and brands I'd heard of. And I actually like actively applied places, either most of them were with a internal recommendation because otherwise you don't get past the slush pile. But I actually actively applied, and it's just a coincidence that the job I actually ended up getting was some guy who saw me on Hacker News and was like, "Hey, this guy's in Japan. He seems helpful." Like that's literally all it was for the job I ended up getting.
Okay, so how did that guy see you in Hacker News?
And he was just browsing the comments somewhere, and he saw me, and he was like, "This guy had a good comment," you know. And he looked at my profile, and I'm like, half-deaf software engineer in Japan, in Tokyo, looking for a job, doing this thing, and so on and so forth. And I think I had a link to my resume in there at one point. I'm not sure, but it was just coincidence, complete coincidence. I mean,
Yeah, I guess
what do you?
often like these opportunities, the good opportunities, you don't necessarily find through traditional ways. And so the more kind of, well, that was kind of putting yourself out there, being active on
Yeah,
Hacker News, even though it wasn't your intention to get a job
yeah.
through there. Um, okay, so how would you recommend learning the Japanese language and programming skills at the same time?
Um, Actually, I want to go back to that previous question for a
Okay.
minute. One other thing I just realized when you said it exactly, I was kind of putting myself out there without realizing it. And I think a lot of people don't realize that they're doing that. Even though it's not necessarily like professional forums or whatever, if they have some web presence, they are purposefully or, accidentally giving people a picture of what they might be like as a person or as an employee. So, for example, in this server, when you see people talking, there could be, like, for example, there could be people in here who are going to be engineering leads or principal engineers or staff engineers or even, CTOs or whatever. And they could be like, oh, yeah, I remember this person talks about that thing a lot, and I really like how they communicate with people. I should go ask them if they need a job or if they know anybody else who needs a job. Like this happens, right? It's all part of it's networking. A lot of people don't like to talk about networking, but that's what it is.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's totally true. It's putting yourself out there, but not in this kind of transactional way. People
yeah,
maybe fail because they're like, my goal is to get a job. Therefore, I should post on the TokyoDev Discord, hire me, everyone. Here are my
yeah,
skills or whatever. And it's like you're just trying to take from people, and people don't
right,
want to work with those kind of people. On the other hand, if you're looking to give to the community or wherever, creating output, creating your presence that way, like most of it isn't going to have any ROI, but
yeah.
occasionally you'll come across this chance opportunity like this.
hmm
So
Yeah, it's karma, I guess, essentially.
yeah,
Um,
it's not necessarily the most effective way of getting a
mhm,
job or getting anything, but it often
yeah,
leads to the best opportunities there, or at least for me, that's kind of how Tokyo Dev was born, was just putting stuff out there without really an expectation of getting something in return.
and it's been growing a lot over the last. When did I join? It was like 7 months ago, I guess. I feel like it was in the winter at some point when we really started trying to use the Discord server, right?
Yeah, I mean, it started less than a year ago, and
hmm
yeah, it has been growing a lot. So, shall we circle
Sorry,
back?
I skipped that question.
Yeah.
Do you remember which one it was?
How would you recommend learning Japanese and programming skills at the same time?
That's a tough one because, well, one, that's not how I learned, right? I learned programming when I was a kid in Japanese in university in a very structured environment. But two, I also wouldn't try to purposefully learn them both at the same time. I think there's, programming languages are languages, right? But and I think there's some skills that are transferable in terms of concepts or like just generally learning anything at the same time has sort of benefits for making more mental hooks to hang things on. But they're relatively separate things, right? I would learn Japanese and I would make structured time for learning Japanese and I would work on programming skills, which are like, language or how you work on projects or how you separate tasks or how you, just general personal management skills like time boxing. But like I'd probably keep those separate, as much as I could personally.
Yeah, I guess in my case, I first started studying Japanese when I was at the end of my university degree. And I guess I was kind of learning both programming and Japanese at the same time, but I was also being a university student then, so maybe I have more time then. Since coming to Japan, I did continue to study Japanese, but at that point, I wasn't really studying programming. I was just doing it as a job. Um, okay, so then, yeah. Companies which provide relocation and visa support. How is the experience, good, bad? I guess that's not something you have specific experience on, Scott.
Not really. The most I can the most I can say is, in my experience, not like my first hand experience, but my second hand experience from talking to people. Um, Maybe it is like, the economic strata that I tend to move in, but in my experience, Japanese companies generally do not provide relocation. And you're lucky if they provide visa support, like in terms of doing the paperwork. Most people I've heard of, unless you're at a company like, say, an ALT dispatch company, one that handles hundreds of visa applications a year. Generally speaking, Japanese companies do not know how to handle visa stuff at all. You kind of have to walk them through it. Um, that's my experience. Like, I would say not very good, and you have to be prepared to do a lot of the research yourself, unless you're, talking Microsoft or something, a big company.
Yeah, that's true. Like of the companies that post on TokyoDev, some of them say they want to hire residents only, like current residents of Japan, just because the whole visa thing's an unknown for them. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, they don't necessarily do that. For the companies that do offer some relocation support, it ranges from will apply for your visa for you or help sponsor that, and that's about it. You're on your
Hmm.
own, to, I guess, one step above, will pay for your flight here and maybe help you find an apartment. And then at the biggest kind of relocation packages among kind of the bigger tech companies, they'll pay for the flight, maybe give you an apartment for the first couple months, and help you get set up. But it's still like, if you're looking to get hired as a local in Japan, you're not going to be getting one of these expat packages where they're paying for everything. Like, at most, they'll help you get your life started here in Japan, and then you're on your own. So
Yeah, exactly. And for the other way around, for example, I know people who've left Japan, software engineers, and they get basically full rides. It's for, mid-career to senior engineer levels. They get, free flight, they get pet relocation, they get a moving company, they get a furnished apartment for the first 2 or 3 months. You know, we're talking, over 10,000, $15,000 here US. So it's very it's a very interesting comparison when you think about it.
yeah, I suppose it is different there. So how would you recommend someone to switch from mech, I don't know if that mechanical engineering, to programming and want to work at Japan? What will be the path of preparation? So I guess just more generally, if you're looking to both take on switch to a kind of developer role and at the same time you want to work in Japan, how would you approach that?
I would try to I would try to find your niche, right? Because even if you're trying, especially if you're trying to switch careers, what you bring to the switch in lieu of experience in that field is your experience in another field. So, for example, if I'm trying to switch from mechanical engineering to programming, I'll just learn programming and try to find jobs that would specifically want that background. For example, there's like factory robotics. Um, Somebody else said here, Ugly said that, there's automotive stuff. There are lots of intersections between different professions that would allow you to leverage your experience in a completely different field. Like, I think somebody else in the server at one point was saying they worked in pharmacies or pharmaceuticals or something. And I was like, there's an easy end, right? Like, there's a lot of pharmacies and pharmaceutical places that want developers who have some kind of background. And it doesn't have to be scientific, like just knowing the terms and knowing the fields and what pharmacists need. like that's going to be a big boost for you.
Yeah. The challenge might be doing the combination of that in Japan in
Yeah.
English. So it's kind of like maybe you want to either in your own country first switch from purely mechanical engineering to a kind of hybrid role, or you need to perhaps get fluent Japanese skills because at least my impression is a lot of these more embedded jobs or more on connected to the hardware side, they're done more by Japanese people in a Japanese environment. The more progressive kind of startup environments tend to be these younger companies and tend to be doing stuff with web or mobile. So you might, there are definitely some companies out there, but it would be really a niche area. And often, I guess, also companies when they're looking to or willing to consider relocating someone, they usually want someone who's going to already be like an exceptional match, someone who they can't find in the country already. And so, yeah, that might be a bit challenging if you don't have that background. But yeah, definitely
100%.
once you've made that switch and you have the mechanical engineering plus programming skills, especially in a professional context, then I think Japanese company would be more willing to take a chance on you. Okay, so what's the day to day life at your current job? Is it completely asynchronous?
Um, this is another one I want to be careful about how I answer, especially since it's my current employer. It is not completely asynchronous. So for context, my company, it's a partner page, and we have a global team. So we have people around the world. There's people in, in Europe. We have some people in Mauritius, South Africa, in the US. There's me in APAC. And I am alone in APAC, yeah, Asia Pacific area, which means I am the most off from everybody else's time zones. So Europe and Eastern US have a decent overlap. I'm basically the other way around, right? And so the way I generally end up working for convenience is, and that's the reason I asked for this at the time it's this event to be at the time it's at, is I usually end up working from about 2 or 3 p.m. to around midnight, I guess. So day to day is, I have some time to myself, and then everybody starts logging on, and then that's when we do the cooperative stuff done. It is to call it asynchronous would be very charitable, I think. But we do the best we can.
Did that kind of match your expectation of how things would work when you got hired?
Um, yes and no. I'm a pessimist. When I got hired, we had a lot of discussions about how this would work practically, and the company wanted to make a strong effort to making things truly asynchronous because as a global company, they really want to be able to do, take advantage of the time zones where you have 24-hour coverage of everything. But at a startup, when you have higher priorities like revenue, it's staying alive, extending your runway, things like making an asynchronous environment and changing your existing working processes takes a very low priority. So I heard a lot of nice things in the hiring process, and in the back of my head, or maybe in the front of my head, I was just like, let's be realistic. If all of leadership is in Eastern Standard Time, like, I don't know how well that's going to work out. So in the middle, like they made efforts. They've made a lot of efforts. They've tried and adjusted things like meetings. Um, I guess it kind of did match my expectations, my realistic expectations, not my, ideal, like this would be amazing expectations.
Okay. Were you a night owl before? No. Okay.
um, for me, my sleep schedule is weird. I've always had sleeping problems, and for better or for worse, I don't have a preferred wake up time. I just need some time to get used to it. So I've run on schedules where I wake up at 4 a.m. before. I've done ones where I woke up at 9 a.m. or 11 a.m. or right now I wake up around noon, you know. Um, I can adapt to pretty much any of them, and there's no schedule where I'm like, oh man, I really like the old one way more. Except in summer, you know. It's nice to wake up early in summer so you can escape the heat here.
True, true. Um, okay, so how are you able to juggle between work, being a mod at TokyoDev, and taking care of two of your cutie doggos? So there maybe actually the dog part is interesting.
Mhm.
What's it like having a pet in Japan? Had you had pets before in the U.S., and is there anything different you've observed here?
Um, I had, as a child, had a number of dogs in the U.S. My family had dogs. I didn't have them. I didn't do anything because I was a child and I was a very bad child at that. So I don't really know what is involved in having a dog in the U.S. I came to Japan when I was like 20. Um, and then I've had my two dogs here. I had one dog, Noah. Noah. Yeah, you can see her. Um, and I've had her for 7 or 8 years now with my ex-girlfriend. But comparatively, the challenges of having a pet, the biggest one is just like finding a place to rent. You know, it's like not knowing Japanese and looking for a job, right? If you're looking for a job in Japan and you don't know Japanese, your job pool goes from this to this. It's the same thing with renting with pets. You know, you have like all the apartments you can rent in the area and price range that you want. And then you have a pet. And then depending on whether your pet is a cat or a dog, it shrinks a little more because not everybody is willing to rent to one or the other. Some are like only cats, only dogs. Depending on the size of your dog, it can shrink even more. If you have two dogs, it turns into something about that big. Because when I was looking 3 years ago, there were about 60 places in my price range in the greater Tokyo area. Out of, tens of thousands, there were 60 that allowed me to have two pets that were dogs. Um, that's just the reality of having a pet here, I think. You just have to. It's the number one thing I warn people about because it can be very intimidating when you realize that your life is actively constrained by the fact that you have a pet. It's not something that people really expect, especially if they're from the U.S.
Yeah, that's definitely true, and I think there's another set of challenges if you're looking to relocate a pet from abroad to here. That's not anything I have any experience with, though.
Yeah. Me either. My dogs are Japanese. I said that before, and people are like, "Oh, they must be so well behaved on the plane." I'm like, "No, they were born and raised in Japan, and they speak Japanese." So,
So you speak to your dogs in Japanese then?
yep, all Japanese for the dogs. That's all they know. They just kind of stare at me if I say something in English. That's why my voice goes up too, because when Noah was originally my ex-girlfriend's dog, and Noah hated and hates men generally. So in the beginning, I'd always pitch my voice up for her as much as I could, and now I still do. And people like in my head, it's like a super high pitch, but other people are just like your voice is barely changing, man. Like it's still deep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, one other thing I was interested to talk to you about was your experience being half deaf in Japan and having
Mhm.
a disability here. Is there, yeah, I don't have any experience with that myself. So could you just talk a bit about your experience?
Um, there's a number of ways I can approach this one, and you can just interrupt me if I'm going too far in any area. When I first came to Japan, I was in this mindset of like, I don't have a disability. Like, I just wanted to ignore it as much as I could because I already felt like I had enough issues in Japan, being foreign, being obviously disfluent Japanese, being like sticking out for any number of factors. I was just like, I don't want to deal with a disability. And it sort of works out, sort of doesn't that way. Because insofar as you don't mess up, people will accept you. But then when you start, like if you're in a noisy environment or somebody is like mumbling or they have a mask on or anything like that that makes it difficult for me to hear, um, because I never properly introduced my disability or accommodations, like they're always just like, oh, it's because you don't speak Japanese, or it's, oh, you because you're foreign, and they'll just like start ignoring you, or they go down that path, like whatever it is that they decide they would need to do with a foreigner. Um, and then as I guess it was mostly just age and tiredness, I started looking in more into like how to function as an adult with a disability in Japan, and I found that from the government's perspective, there is some level of support that I had never expected or been aware of in the form of it's called a Shogaisha Teicho, Shintai Shogaisha Teicho, a physical disability certificate. Um, you have to go through this whole like medical examination procedure at a certified doctor, and then you can apply for it. And I got it. And it's a big help when you don't have a very high salary because there are various like stipends and support mechanisms you can apply for through it. And it also gives you discounts at things like trains over 100 kilometers, you get half off for you and somebody with you, ostensibly a helper. Domestic plane flights are half off. Movie theater tickets are half off. Zoos, museums, and stuff like I guess what we would call like federal stuff in the U.S. is all for free here. And I was really glad I found that. It was a big help because I pay a lot of money every year for batteries and replacement parts and cables and stuff for my cochlear implant processor. And I had always been a pinch, and any kind of relief was good for that. So financially, having help from the government that I discovered, 4 or 5 years into my time in Japan, I was just kind of like, I wish somebody had told me this sooner. Like I could have been getting all this assistance, this financial assistance way sooner. It would have been super helpful. Um, but in terms of society, there wasn't and still isn't really that much support. You'll go to like bigger companies, for example, you go to JR, they will have signs that say like, if you need us to, we will write things, and it varies. Some people, and this isn't just in Japan, some people, if you ask them to write something, they will tend to write only keywords, and they expect you to like magically just suck the meaning out of 5 words. It'll just be like key, house, hotel, road, and you'll be like, okay, and some people would just like write down what they would say, and there's a happy medium in there too. But it really depends on the individual, and sometimes you have to coach them and be really patient, and it can be frustrating. Lately, since the pandemic started, I say lately, but it's been, 3.5 years, everybody's wearing masks. So it's doubly hard for me to understand anybody because I can't lip read off of them. And the mask pulls on my ear, which makes my implant processor fall off. So I tend to not wear it when I go out. So I'm just like deaf all the time. I just straight up tell people I cannot hear a single thing. Do not call me on the phone. Just write down everything you want to say and we'll figure it out from there. And it's sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. There's not very much exposure to people with certain types of disabilities in Japan, which is a whole other issue. It's been like it's doable. Like living with a disability in Japan depends on your patience, your Japanese ability, um, and your persistence, I guess, in trying to make sure you are treated um, with a basic level of respect and given the most basic level of agency. Because no matter what country you're in, people will try to take that from you if you have a disability. They will try, and a lot of the times, I will say it comes from a place of kindness, right? They wanna help you. Sometimes it's from a place of frustration. They just want to get it over with. They don't want to sit there and write things for 15 minutes. They don't want to explain everything in writing. Maybe their wrist hurts. Maybe they're not like they think their handwriting is crap, whatever. They just want to like get through it and get you out the door. They don't want to deal with you, you know. Very long answer, but if you have any follow-up questions to that, you can go for it. I have a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there was a lot of interesting stuff in there. So you said in the beginning you were just acting like you didn't have a disability. So that includes like when you were getting hired as a developer here in Japan at the first company, you just didn't try to get any accommodations there or anything. Like, did it kind of come out eventually, or did were you able to
Um,
just function?
My okay, so the interesting thing about trying to apply as an English teacher in Japan, even in 2007, everybody said it's one of the easiest ways to get over here with a visa, with the status of residence. Um, is if you have some kind of communicative disability, it's a huge minus, right? So, I'll show you. You can see it, right? Like it's very visible, especially now that I have no hair. Um, And so they would ask me about that in interviews when I was trying to apply to Eikaiwa in person. Um, and like you said, at the time, I would just try to hide it and brush it off. I'd be like, oh, yeah, sometimes I can't hear that well. And now I have lots of coping behaviors. I think anybody with a disability of any kind develops coping behaviors to fit in. And I had a lot, and they worked pretty well. And a lot of people were just like, even today, people would be like, "I never knew you were half deaf, Scott. You seem so normal, right?" And that's what I did in the beginning. I'd just be like, I can't use the phone, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, that's kind of a pain in the butt," but they accept it. And then the second company, um, I was a little more upfront with the second company because that was after I decided to sort of like, disclose and try to get some accommodations. And I saw around the office, like a lot of people were using IP phones. They were using just like internal phone lines and stuff to contact each other. And I straight up told the owner, I'm like, I'm not going to use a telephone. I'm not going to put one on my desk. Um, I'd like everything to be an email. It'll be great for you because that means you'll be able to communicate with me better. We're going to have a written record. We can look up things. It's all in Gmail right there. And I gave him all the benefits. And it was less like change yourself for me. It's more of selling it, right? Like this is what's going to happen if we move to email. It's going to be really helpful for everybody. Like I saw, this person did remember so and so thing. Like let's just go to email more. And luckily they were very accommodating about that.
Good. That's good. You just mentioned your implant. So was that something you had gotten before coming to Japan, or?
Yeah. So if I give you my medical history, um, when I was about two or so, I started losing my hearing. It was progressive sensory neural hearing loss. I was profoundly deaf by the time I was like 5 or 6. And the fact that it started so relatively late is why I can, speak. But that had gone on until my senior year of high school. So when I was 16, like for all intents and purposes, from the time I was like 10 to 16, I was functionally deaf. I had hearing aids, but I couldn't really hear anything. Um, and so when I was 16, the middle of my senior year of high school, I got the cochlear implant surgery at Johns Hopkins. And I was one of the last people to get the kind where they cut your head open, they take out a giant piece of your skull and they do the surgery. After me, it was like everybody got the one with like the laparoscopic surgery with like a tiny little hole and they're healed in hours. And anyway, but yes, I got it when I was 16, so I've had it 22 years now. I've had the cochlear implant. So that was before I came to Japan, before I went to university. Otherwise, I never would have bothered studying a language. Uh, I studied Latin in high school because it's a dead language. Nobody speaks it. That was the only reason I picked it. Um, yeah.
So is it something that needs servicing that you can get done in Japan, or do you have to go back to the States to deal with that, or?
Um, when I first came over to Japan, I was supposed to have had like annual appointments for. There's a program that runs inside the processor, and I was supposed to have annual appointments to sort of tune it, right? Um, and it was prohibitively expensive to fly back to the U.S. on an ALT salary, and so I never did that. And as time passed, the company made it into Japan, got a little more widely supported, and nowadays I can go to Toranomon, and they're like one of a handful of hospitals in Tokyo that will support this brand of cochlear implant. Um, Parts I can order through the Japanese affiliate company here because it's all branded. Like there's no third party parts. The various companies' parts are not interchangeable. You have to like buy your company's parts or nothing. And I used to have to import those from the U.S., but now I can buy those in Japan too. It's it is what it is. It's just you deal with it.
That's too bad, but I guess that's kind of inevitable with this sort of thing.
Yeah, it's the edge cases don't really get. I mean, edge cases are edge cases anywhere, but I feel like it's a little harder in Japan because people just don't consider them, and Japan is so used to a certain amount of uniformity, I think, for better or for worse.
Like, you mean people don't consider getting an implant here?
That's one big thing. Yeah. A lot of people here don't consider getting a cochlear implant, or they don't have. I've spoken to deaf people who don't know they exist here. There are a lot of people who can't afford it. I mean, it's head surgery, um, and there's less financial assistance. There's less support. There's less post-op rehabilitation. There's less everything support for folks with hearing disabilities in Japan. I think that make it holistically prohibitive to consider getting a cochlear implant here versus in the U.S. So,
Apart from then that implant, how has like your experience been different in Japan versus in the States, if anything?
you mean just like general like life experience or living?
Uh, yeah, sure.
Um, Wait, do you mean like with respect to my disability or just in general?
Well, I guess I was initially asking about your disability, but I guess we can move
hmm
beyond that to more generally.
Um, so from the disability perspective, like I said, I was barely in the U.S. as an adult, but my experience in the U.S., from what I remember, this is 16 years ago at this point, people were generally willing to listen and accommodate on the spot. People had some awareness of, what hearing loss was or what deafness was. Here, it's tougher because I think a lot of people are less comfortable with doing things on the fly or stepping outside of a box or certain rules, especially if you're dealing with somebody in a workplace setting, right? If you're going to the realtor and you're like, I can't understand you, can you write something down? There's a lot of fluster, like, oh, how do I do this? Like, what should I write? Should I use like respectful language in Japanese? Can I just write, desmas? Can I like, I don't want to write all these kanji. Can I write kanji? Can you read? Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff around it here that makes it more complicated. Um, so I've developed, like this list of things I say, like, can you write it? Yes, you can use kanji. No, you do not have to use, respectful or humble language. You don't have to use all kanji. Like, just just write it. Um, that's the main difference in terms of the disability, I think, as far as I can remember for the U.S. Like things have changed a lot. Um, in terms of general life, it's also such a big difference for me. Like I grew up in a town of, 500 people or something, a village of 500 people. And the next biggest town was like, 18,000 people or something like that, and that was 15, 20 minutes down the highway. Um, Whereas coming here, I moved to a city that had like 300,000 people. Well, first I was in a village that had like, I'm pointing as if like you can see some invisible line to the village I'm talking about. I lived in a village in Saitama for a month or so. It was very tiny, and then I moved to a city in Gunma that had 300,000 people. It was just like incomparable for me. Um, so as a consequence of having lived mostly in cities in Japan, it's more convenient. There's more people, there's more things to do, more things to eat. Um, and it's really hard for me to personally attribute that to U.S. versus Japan instead of, middle of nowhere versus middle of somewhere.
Yeah, true. We had a question: do companies provide health support? I guess Japan has national health insurance, and companies are basically required, or you have health insurance through your employer if you're a normal company employee with standard kind of benefits there. I guess, are there any other? You were talking about some of the other disability. Once you get the disability certificate, there were some other benefits there. Um,
Mhm.
I don't know if there's any other health benefits you're aware of.
Um, so the disability certificate, to be clear, is entirely personal. It's not related to your employment. So even if you're unemployed, or if you are, if you're on a spouse visa and you don't work, or you work for a foreign company, you can still get the disability certificate. Health support, companies, I think, generally try to stay out of that. They want you to deal with it yourself, in my experience. Um, and like, I think the most you can expect from a company is unofficial support. Like, Paolo was talking about this the other day, right? He said one of his coworkers, I don't even know if it was a coworker or somebody in his training group or whatever. But generally speaking, I think the most I've heard from people is that, some employee at the company really helped them, find a specific doctor or medicine that worked well for them or whatever. But nothing official from the company. But in terms of benefits the company gets out of hiring somebody with a disability, a lot of people may not know this, but depending on your company size, there are tax penalties for not hiring a certain number. There's a ratio. It's like, depending on your company size, a certain number of people with disabilities. And then disabilities here on your certificate are rated. It goes from like 6 to 1, with one being like the most severe type of disability. I have a two. Um, and if a company is, say, like, 150 people and has no employees with disabilities over like a three, then they get a tax penalty. So what happens is you have a lot of Japanese companies who have jobs specifically meant for people with disabilities, and they're generally very menial, low-paying jobs, um, with no hope of advancement or training or whatever. And it's solely so they can get those, like, so they can fill that quota of people with disabilities. Another way, for example, I think Medicali does this, a lot of big Japanese companies do this, is to sponsor um, a sports team with disabilities. Like, amputee soccer or something is really big in the US right now. And that's a way you can sort of like get around it. And you have people on the payroll that satisfy the quota set by the government, and then you don't get the tax penalty. That's how the company can like benefit from it. It's a really weird transactional thing, I think. But other than that, I can't think of any way that companies really want to be involved with an employee's physical or mental health. I'm like trying to speak very carefully about this, but that's kind of the reality of what I've seen.
Yeah, it's true that I mean, even here, things like sick days are relatively uncommon, and you're expected either to work through the sickness, or if it's bad, you take time off. Theoretically, if through, I guess, the national health insurance or workers' compensation, if you're having to take off more than a certain time, it will be compensated. But in general, employers just don't want you to get sick. They want you to just keep working there. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so another question in your opinion, how many years of experience is required before you can confidently apply for a job in Japan? This person's been working for 3 years and they aren't confident yet. Should they be confident and just apply, or wait to improve their Japanese skills more?
Um, it's a complex question, right? My general answer is just to apply. The practice is good. The interview practice is good. Interviewing in Japanese practice is good. And you never know, you might get lucky. But in terms of probability, like I think you want to be past entry level, which it sounds like this person is at 3 years. Because in reality, you bring some stuff to the table as a foreigner, but you also bring a lot of risks. They don't know if you're going to stay. They don't know if you're just going to they don't know if you're going to stay in the country. They don't know if you're going to stay with them, like, or using them as a stepping stone to try to apply somewhere better. Um, they have to train you up. There's a lot of, cultural onboarding that goes on in a Japanese company. They have to basically teach you everything from scratch in terms of working in a Japanese company, even if you have like professional experience elsewhere. So in return for all those risks, you have to offer something. And I think that for companies that want to hire foreign employees in general, it's their experience in what is often perceived as like the big leagues overseas, right? Um, 3 years, I guess, is okay. Like, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying 3 years is probably near the minimum I'd want to try to be hired here. It's either, new graduate or mid-career to me in my head. Like that entry level is like something you cannot bridge in terms of comparison with the Japanese, like somebody local in Japan. I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe you have like a different experience running a job board. But that's kind of what I've seen.
Okay, I guess from what I see, why companies want to hire someone internationally is just because if they are opening jobs to people who don't speak Japanese, they can get a ton of really qualified, good applicants there to it. And so they're really looking for someone who's going to be really exceptional. And like, I know imposter syndrome is a thing. So on the one hand, I do want to tell you to be confident, but you also need to be able to kind of project that confidence and demonstrate why you're an exceptional person. You need to maybe think about that yourself, figure that out, because just there's going to be so much competition on other people who have. It doesn't really matter how many years of experience you are. Like, companies use years of an experience as kind of a minimum threshold for people. It can be like a requirement they put in place just to do the first batch of filtering. But so they'll just automatically disqualify people without at least X years of experience. But just having then 3 years or 5 years or 10 years of experience doesn't mean you're going to get an interview. If you're not able to demonstrate what about you is kind of exceptional for the company, how are you going to be such a great fit that is worth taking all these risks Scott talked about? You're not going to be able to get an interview there. So yeah, it's a combination of, well, it goes back to not just your technical skills, but also your soft skills, your communication skills, your almost like empathy, being able to see things from the company's perspective. What kind of person are they looking to hire? And then how can you kind of fit into that? So you don't need to be like a technical genius about everything, but you need to be able to figure out how you can add a lot of value to that company. Um, I guess that's one way. The other way would be if you do get fluent Japanese skills, then you're able to apply for a wider range of jobs, and then you're able to apply for companies who are maybe not explicitly hiring foreigners there, and then you automatically become exceptional there, in that the company's like asking themselves, hey, why is this foreigner applying for this position? This is kind of interesting. Maybe we'd love to be more international company. And you can maybe at least get your foot in the door that way. Other way is maybe just, yeah, if you have worked at some international famous company, if you've worked at Facebook or Google or some company that a Japanese recruiter has heard of, that can be enough to get your foot in the door here. But otherwise, yeah, companies are generally not just going to hire you because you just apply for them. They're not going to interview you even. So you really need to see how you can be a great fit for them. And yeah, that the good thing about that though is it's a skill set in and of itself to figure out how to craft a good application for a job, how to apply to the right companies, how to do this kind of networking or whatever Scott was talking about earlier, and all these kind of things. Like most developers, we suck at this stuff, and so the bar's pretty low. And so I would look at like how you can improve your ability to apply for jobs, how you can kind of identify the companies like you're actually really interested in and are worth investing in your application, rather than just spamming your applications everywhere. I think a lot of people think like, if I apply to enough companies, I'm going to get a hit, and maybe some people do, but I actually think it's more efficient if you apply for less companies, but the right ones there. Okay, and I guess kind of related to that, there was someone asking about what about working in international companies with no Japanese. Yeah, those are just the really competitive opportunities there. And so I guess that's just another kind of path, is if you are already in Japan somehow, if you're here as an ALT like Scott was, if you're here on a working holiday visa, if you're here on a student visa even, just being a resident of Japan does lower the bar a bit and make companies more willing to take a chance on you, just because there's a smaller applicant pool of people who are already based here. So, and there's less perceived risk, as the company doesn't have to relocate someone who might not actually like living in Japan or whatever there. And then also changing visas from one type to another is a lot faster and more straightforward than having to get a new one from scratch, which in the best case, if you're a really big company, you can maybe get it in 2 weeks, but more typically it takes a couple months to maybe even 6 months for an initial visa if you're getting hired by a startup. And most startups change so much in 6 months that like 6 months to get the visa plus maybe another couple months for you to get your stuff, all your affairs sorted. It's like 8 months, maybe there take a couple months from hiring process. So like it might even be like a year between the time you apply and the time you're in the ground in Japan. And so that's just a big ask for the company. And some companies will go through that if they can really find the right person. But yeah, it's a big commitment for the company. So yeah, they won't. They're not so willing just to take chances on people there.
And like the time to issue the certificate of eligibility that you were talking about. Like what I see questions in here like, oh my company wants me to work on a tourist visa until it comes in. It's not legal, but it's also not uncommon for the same reasons that you mentioned. Like how can guys should do it all the time. They'll have people fly over, work on a tourist visa while the COE is in the works, and like it's an individual choice if you want to break the law. There's circumstances for and against it, but it's not uncommon in my experience to be asked to do that, right? Like you said, companies don't want to wait 6 months for somebody. Um,
Okay.
And I'm not saying like anybody should break the law here, but just because a company is asking you to do that doesn't mean they're immediately like. I think somebody before was saying like, "Oh, I should report this company to the labor bureau," and like, yes, but no. I think it's complex.
So that's not something I'm so aware of, or at least I've personally seen. What
Mhm.
seems to be more common, especially post COVID, is that companies are having someone work remotely in the beginning there. But yeah, it might happen there. I I guess I've always been
Mhm.
personally hesitant to take any risks around anything where you kind of know what you're doing is wrong there. Like, I think Japanese society and the legal system puts a lot of emphasis on intent there. And if you're doing something in good faith, I think generally speaking, you don't need to be so worried here. But if you're trying to pull something off on a technicality, that's where you can get in trouble. Even if you can kind of point to, under these conditions, I should be okay here, they're going to be a lot more likely to come down hard on you, I think, if you get yourself into that sort of circumstance. So I understand there are some options companies have for bringing people over temporarily to do work in Japan. It's not a tourist visa. I think it's some other visa there or something. I have heard of some circumstances there, but I'd be just careful. You If you're looking to set up your life here, you maybe want to do it with a good start there. But on the
Right.
other hand, I mean, people come to Japan for all sorts of different reasons. And that's one of the reasons why on this server we want to be careful about assuming people have the same reasons as others, like myself and Scott, who have came from relatively rich countries. Like, coming to Japan is not, we at least in my own case, it wasn't primarily a financial thing here. But I know there are people who are coming here from maybe more developing countries where salary is a bigger thing here. And I mean, there's just different people have different reasons and maybe need to take different risks. Yeah, okay. So we had another question. Let's say we already get in a company. What are the chances the company doesn't go bankrupt or you get affected for something like a downsizing in the next 3 to 5 years? My current perspective is that some companies sometimes list their capital reserves on their websites, and the bigger the numbers, the more likelier for them to live or last a long time. So the number that companies are listing on their website isn't, well, that's
It's not
basically,
directly related to the health, right?
yeah,
It's
that's
kind of like what you have to put out there legally.
that's basically what someone has invested in the company. Like for TokyoDev, it has a capital of 1 million yen, and that capital is unrelated to how much revenue I'm doing or anything like that. I guess, yeah, it's true that the higher the capital is, the more people have invested in the company, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the financial health of the company itself there. Um,
I
I
think
Go ahead.
oh sorry, go ahead.
I guess my personal experience when I joined a company here in Japan, the company was a great place to work as a developer, but their financial health turned out not to be so good, and they were trying to rely on investment, but they couldn't raise another round, and it was clear this company, something really had to change, and because of that, I had already decided to leave the company and gave my notice when this happened. But the company said basically, we don't know if we have enough money to pay everyone going forward. If you want to quit, go ahead. We welcome you to leave the company. And so, interestingly, not everyone did quit at that point. I think about half the people left the company. And I guess, yeah, the as I understand, the people who did stay on, everyone did eventually get paid there. Um, but yeah, um, yeah, that was just my experience there. I think normally, I think you're gonna know already when things are starting to go bad for the company. Probably, I think it's pretty hard to cover that up. Even just the atmosphere and the kind of meetings that are held and whatnot. There, you usually know when the company's financial health is not so good. But yeah, you have any thoughts on this, Scott?
I was gonna say one common mistake I see with people evaluating for foreigners evaluating companies is, they see the words capital reserve. It's like a standard English translation, right? Um, and they think it means runway, but that's not what it means. Like you said, it's like an initial investment. And you can see tremendously large companies that have a capital reserve of 3 million yen or something. It doesn't mean they're doing poorly or they don't have money in the bank. It's just usually, in my experience, it's some kind of like required minimum investment to reach some bar for whether it was like to get another investor to sign on, like when you have so much invested yourself, or to, some kind of legal bar or corporate size bar. Like it's not. I don't think anybody out there is thinking like we're a large company. We want to show that we're healthy, so we're gonna put in, 500 million in our capital reserve. Like it's like you were saying, like a low a capital reserve could possibly indicate that the company is financially healthy, but a low capital reserve doesn't necessarily translate the same way. It doesn't mean the company is unhealthy. Like it's kind of like a meaningless number, I think. Like there's
Yeah.
some meaning, but you can't directly intuit a lot from that number. It's like knowing somebody's height, right? You can't really be like, oh, he's 186 centimeters. He's probably great at basketball. Like there's so many factors that go into it.
Yeah, I mean, I believe one thing it does determine is the maximum amount of liability a company can have. And so that could be one reason why bigger companies may only want to deal with companies when they're doing contract of a certain size, if they have a certain amount of registered capital or whatever. But yeah, it's not direct to the financial health. Someone mentioned downsizing is difficult for companies to do here, at least compared to the US. I mean, yeah, I guess that's why companies here tend to ask people to voluntarily resign there, which even if a company can't, well, they have ways of maybe pressuring people to voluntarily resign, but the thing is, once you start asking people to resign, the good people tend to leave and go on to other opportunities there. And so, even if you can find reasons why the company can't directly fire you or lay you off there so easily, like I think generally it's not a pleasant experience working for a company that's financially struggling there. Um, but
Um,
yeah, go ahead.
um, that just means like, things like I think a lot of developers in the US worry about whether a company they're at is going to institute, for example, stack ranking. And for those who don't know, stack ranking is where every team in a company lists their engineers in order of perceived efficiency or output or skill. Like they stack them, right? And they say, okay, bottom two people are fired. And that's what they do every single year. So you have this constant churn and this rat race. And it's a worry for people in the US sometimes. But that can't happen. It can't happen here because it can't just be like, bottom two people, this team, you're gone. They can't do that here. They could pressure you. They could say, we're going to lower your salary. We're going to move your desk to someplace unpleasant. We're going to change your working hours. Like they can pressure you, like you said. But there's never that worry, I think, in a Japanese company, as especially as a Seishain, where you're just not going to have a job. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think people are always talking about salaries in the US for developers and how it's so great that you can earn so much money there. But part of it is just being an employee in the US does not give you the same benefits as a lot of other places. And it's a bit more than being a freelancer, but it's kind of comparable to being, say, a freelancer in Japan with at will employment, that you have to take the risk that you're going to be laid off at any time. Beyond for reasons beyond your control, even just the company decides they want to be more profitable, so we have to get rid of some people, and your number just happens to come up there. So yeah, I guess that's whereas in Japan, I guess one good thing as an international person is your visa tends not even to be tied to your employer. And so you don't have the same, you aren't so locked up in one company. If things are starting to go bad there, you can relatively easily find a job at another company. And if that company wants to hire you, you start there the next day or as soon as you give your notice. Whereas I know in the US, if you're on the H1B1 visa or whatever, it's like very challenging to change companies there. So yeah, companies I think have less kind of I don't know way to kind of keep you locked in there, which is maybe part of the reason why some companies are hesitant to hire foreigners who aren't based in Japan, because they are worried someone will just kind of use them as a visa mill to basically get a job here and then quickly switch to another company.
yeah, and this can also be why I think companies in Japan can be a little more, in some ways, maybe not technically, but in a lot of ways, rigorous in checking who they hire, because it is an investment for them. Because like on Hacker News and wherever in the U.S. and in engineering world, it's like, hire quickly, fire quickly. You can't do that in here. I mean, you have a 3 to 6 month trial period in the contract, but beyond that, once you hire somebody, you're pretty much stuck with them. And that's also why you can see a lot of small and medium sized companies in Japan will prefer to retrain somebody. Like you were saying, like if they just don't need a certain position anymore, they'll try to retrain people. I have especially women. I have a lot of women friends here, Japanese women friends who are programmers but not software engineers, and they were formerly like accountants or something. And the company's like, oh, we have a PHP application we need maintained. So you're going to move your desks and you're going to be programmers tomorrow. And that's just kind of what they do. They go there at 9, they crank out some PHP, and they go home at 6 or 7. And it's not like a calling for them. It's just what the company made them do. Because the company wants people who know how things work. And I'm talking about like, more general companies, not software companies here. Like an insurance company, or um, like one of my friends works at it's like a butcher company, not a butcher company, but like a meat company. Like they handle like Nippon Hame. Um, so that's kind of like a weirder experience in Japan compared to the U.S. Like you don't get re-bracketed that easily in the U.S., I feel.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the whole lifetime employment thing, which is getting to be less of a thing here, but still is a thing for some people here. Okay, I think that was my questions. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Um, but we had a question. We can go 2 ways here. I don't know which one you want to do. I was collecting questions separately in the events channel, and there's about one, two, three, four questions there, five maybe. I think there's a couple more, but I'm afraid to click out of this window because I don't know what's going to happen to the event.
Yeah.
But so we could. I have some questions for you, or we could go straight to the questions for other people. I don't know which one you prefer right now.
Okay. You can ask me some questions.
Okay. Um. So So you've said a couple of times in the past that Tokyo Dev just kind of happened. Like it just kind of grew out of this blog you had, and it grew into a job board. Do you have? And you've said like in the past with Doorkeeper, I think for example, you were just kind of like it just kind of happened again, and you weren't really sure how to like make it grow or sell it, and or like sell the product, sell the service, and then you decided just kind of like sell the whole company and just like you're like I can't do anything with this. We'll give it to somebody who can. But like how do you feel that experience affected or if it affected like the way you want to manage or grow Tokyo Dev? Like is there anything specific you want to do in the future or you just kind of like we'll see where it goes and how long it lasts?
Oh, okay. Yeah. I guess they are kind of interesting to compare. So
Hmm.
Doorkeeper started as like a developer side project where it was like very much focused on the software side of things and let's build some cool tool, and it kind of got popular. And once it became popular and had a bunch of usage, it was like how do we find a business model to support this? And uh, that was quite challenging for me because it was already such a wide product that was complicated and had a very broad audience to it. And so there was so many different options for how we could monetize it. And at the same time, like it was hard to like define the audience or whatever for it. And so, yeah, I guess that kind of did shape my experience with TokyoDev in that when I was starting it, well, I say it kind of happened, but from the pretty early on, I did realize, hey, companies want to hire developers. They're willing to pay money for this. I had companies telling me, hey, I'm willing to pay you money if you help hire someone. And so the business model there, even if the exact one was not clear, it was very clear there was a business model there, and who was going to pay was kind of clear, and all that stuff was clear. And so I guess as I was doing it, though, I wanted to be careful to avoid writing too much software for it, because of my experience with Doorkeeper, I know how easy it is for us as developers to just start writing code and building stuff there and not necessarily building the right things there. So I wanted to see how far I could go with the business without, or with the site, or with everything, just using off the parts shelves and keeping things simple. So Tokyo Dev for a long time was using MailChimp for a mailing list, Google Groups to help facilitate applications to companies, and then a static website generated from some data files and some Ruby scripts. And so that was in part a reaction to my experience with Doorkeeper, where I had built a lot of software out maybe too quickly there. Um, Now Tokyo Dev has kind of grown to the point where, as a business, I was seeing that it was starting to hold me back by like being too scared to create some software there. And so I have started to create some on stuff like helping us to manage the backend for jobs so we can have more people helping with that side of things, or automating some stuff. Or I'm basically kind of looking to use software to make the existing processes around the site and the service smoother. But yeah, I guess my experience with Doorkeeper still does make me maybe more scared of quickly building out stuff there, because like it's nice to have something that's very simple. When something's simple, nothing can go wrong with it. But now that I have servers, there's things beyond my control, and whatnot there. But yeah, I guess because TokyoDev has had a really clear audience in mind. I mean, the site is for international software developers to start and grow their career in Japan. I have this really focused audience. I have the companies are internationally minded Japanese companies that want to hire software developers with little to no Japanese skills. That's also clear. The business model's also clear there, and yeah, so I think that that aspect of it has been easier for me. Now it's like TokyoDev has actually been doing pretty well financially, to the point where it's like I want to start, or I wanted to start reinvesting what the business was making back in the business. Up until like last year, I was basically just taking all the money off the table from the service, which was nice, but it was also like I started to pay more and more taxes, and it's like also like just felt like, I don't know, like this, even the job board and this Discord, it's like a community here. It's developers, and I'm making money because I'm helping developers, but I also kind of want to not just suck the life out of the community, but look to kind of create this virtuous cycle around it, and how I can kind of extend it beyond just being myself. And so that's what people have started to see. Like TokyoDev is now no longer just my personal blog, but we're starting to have articles from other people. We're having this Discord, we're having these chats. I'm just looking for now more opportunities to kind of grow the business and the site and the service beyond just being my kind of personal blog, and getting more people involved.
Do you have any like concrete steps in mind, like things you want to accomplish? Because personally, we've talked about the meetups, right? Like the meetup started because I was bored, and I was like, "Hey, does anybody want to meet up?" And it turned into like I think you messaged me after I said that, and you're like, "Hey, TokyoDev could pay for this," and we had our first meetup. We had three so far, right? And I organized all three of them, generally out of the expectation from other people that like it was an official thing. In reality, for me, it was not official in the beginning. It was just like me being bored. Um, and so we've had discussions about like you want to try to find like a way to make them more regular, more easier for people to anticipate, like maybe a regular meeting space. Like, is there anything else like that that you want to expand into and reinvest into?
Okay, so beyond that, like I think first, right, what I've been focused on right now is more just kind of cleaning up the existing kind of internal processes, so it doesn't have to involve me so much and can take advantage of using software. And so there's still probably another 3 to 6 months of work on that stuff. But at the same time, I guess I'm just someone, when I see an opportunity, it's kind of hard for me to turn it down. And so, like, when people were enthusiastic about doing these meetups, it's like, this is something I want to support because it's kind of good for the community. It's good for people. I've attended them. It's fun there. It has a nice atmosphere. And so, yeah, I'm just like, I guess I want to just I just will take on more things as I see them come up. And so, yeah, I guess that's something where I want to kind of use TokyoDev's resources to kind of help the community again. And so that's stuff we've talked about before, like having a hackathon. That's something I can support, but on the other hand, my time itself is limited. And so, like, ideal thing for me is if I can have someone else who wants to do something, and their limiting factor is maybe money, financial one, or they want an audience is another thing I can offer. It's like, how can I offer what I already have to other people and let them run with it? And so that's why things like the articles have been good for me, because it's a chance for me to get other people to contribute. I have been compensating the authors for these articles, so it's a way to kind of share the community's success back with them. And so, yeah, if other people have ideas around that sort of thing, I'd love for them to talk to me. But I also understand it's kind of hard to just volunteer to kind of do these sorts of things. So, yeah.
Right. We talked about this before too, right? Where I've like half complained about it, where people will say like, "I want this thing," but then nobody actually steps up to make it, and I always wonder if there's like invisible wall where people are like, "I want this, but I'm not official, so I can't propose it." They all come to me. They're like, "Scott, why don't you run this meetup? Why don't you start a hackathon?" And like, just do it yourself. Like, tell Paul or something. There's nothing official about the process, right? It's all right now. It's all grassroots, and people can just kind of like start something. They can.
Yeah.
That's
I,
why we initially had the events channel public, right? So people could just like post their own stuff in there. I think Gray did something about a photo event at one point.
yeah. I think, though, part of it is the people who are like motivated to actually organize something themselves. They're either already doing it or they want it also to be their own thing. So there is kind of this tricky thing that, like, I have TokyoDev as a brand or a site or a community or whatever, and it kind of is mine at the end. And so I wonder if that's also kind of a limiting factor, that people, if they want to organize a hackathon, maybe it's not clear to them why they would organize a TokyoDev hackathon over another one. And so that's, I guess, also then just something more general again, where I want to find ways to support communities, even if they aren't TokyoDev official communities or whatever, and especially ones that are kind of under supported or underrepresented, which was why I was looking to support communities that were supporting female software engineers in Japan, because that was one area I saw was underrepresented, and it's not like a problem I can personally easily fix, but it is easy for me to like write a check to some of these communities. So yeah, that's another thing. If someone, yeah, just if someone in this community or listening just wants to do something, whatever you want to do, I want to see how I can support you.
It's out there on the record now, so everybody is like officially obligated to bring stuff to you.
Yeah, for sure.
Have you ever thought about something like scholarships? Like not even like not like big university full ride kind of, like maybe as possible in Japan, because universities here can be very cheap comparatively, but scholarships to help people who want to go to like Code Chrysalis or Lewagon or any of that stuff. Like, is that something you've considered?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something I have considered. It's also like, okay, what it is like a bit of a tricky space for me, in that like TokyoDev is doing well for a company with myself as the only employee and some contractors, but I'm not a big company there.
Yeah.
And so with these sponsorships, also, I am looking for them to be sponsorships and not donations, because for tax reasons. Also, like, I'm hoping that even if I don't get 100% of the benefit back, there is some kind of clear path back there. And so, like, having TokyoDev's logo up on some sites or whatever, that does help me a bit there. A scholarship might be a bit more challenging there, especially like, I think it would make the most sense if I was looking to hire the person after, for instance, there. Like, that's why companies are offering internship programs often, is they want to get someone back in the future. And I'm maybe not quite to that size yet, but yeah, it is an interesting opportunity. But yeah, I guess also figuring out how best to deploy the capital is another thing because, like, yeah, yeah, just trying to identify which opportunities will have that right combination of being good for the community, having some sort of return for TokyoDev, just to make things sustainable.
Circling back to something you just kind of touched on there for hiring, how likely, like in your head, like would you dog food your product? Would you, if you wanted to hire somebody again for Tokyo Dev, would you put a listing right up on Tokyo Dev, or would you be more likely to go through like personal contacts, people you know, or people in the community? Like which one seems more appealing to you for hiring?
Well, okay, I guess like so far I have gone through the community there, and basically all the freelancers, with the exception of one, have just been through people I've met through events and whatnot. Now, I guess hiring a freelancer is kind of different than hiring a regular employee, just because you're already looking for someone who's maybe has that kind of mindset and isn't necessarily looking for a full-time job. Um, if I was, I mean, if I was looking to hire a regular employee, that's something I've thought about doing just for experiencing that process, because like I'm giving companies all of this advice about how to create a good job description and whatnot, how to sell yourself as a company, but I've never hired a regular employee before. So I thought, yeah, that maybe more than like a scholarship, I could potentially see in the future me hiring some, like, say, junior developer kind of position there. And then, yeah, I would probably want to post it to Tokyo Dev there just to for that experience.
Are you ready for like the flood of applications you would get through it? Like you would literally be seeing like what happens to all these other companies that open the gates, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so that is what I normally advise companies to do, is just recruit broadly in your job application and then filter mercilessly after. And I mean, it's a shame, but I think as a company, you're going to have to filter out people who they might be a good match, but you just can't necessarily talk to everyone there. And so, yeah, if I was to post something for me, I guess, like especially for hiring for a junior kind of role, I'd be looking for someone who was really demonstrating they were applying to Tokyo Dev and not another company, and also someone who had kind of enough of that entrepreneurial mindset or communication skills to kind of demonstrate that. So yeah, no, I don't think I would be worried about getting too many people there.
How much? So we talk a lot, and you more often than me in the resume channel about our preferred resume formats, right? Like you want the single column, you integrate your skills into your job descriptions, or the dot points rather have, things that you accomplished rather than just like I did this thing for the company. Or I mean in the sense of like response, we want to see accomplishments as opposed to responsibilities. So how much of your filtering would you say, like, would you personally base off of the resume? Would you see like a three-column resume with a bunch of graphics and percentages on skills and be like, nope?
Yeah, basically. I mean, you have to use some simple
Hmm.
heuristics there, and so I guess I personally would be first filtering based on the kind of cover letter, whatever message they send me there. That would be a way to immediately get my attention. So
Oh,
it
so sorry to interrupt. So would you, if they did not have a cover letter at all, are you just like, nope? Like the cover letter is going to be like a bare minimum for you since you want somebody specifically interested.
I don't think I would necessarily skip out over them, but it's like
Hmm.
if someone had a good cover letter, like to me that's the place to establish why you're a good match to the company. But
Hmm.
at the same time, because I have seen through TokyoDev how people are writing these things, most people are not going to do a great job there. So if I'm not getting a good enough good cover letters, then yeah, it would go to the resume. But I guess for me, I want to hire someone who I'm excited about working with. And
Hmm.
if they can't make me somehow excited based on their application, then I don't think I would interview them. But we're talking about this theoretical job, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
if I'm in this position where, hey, it's nice to hire someone, I don't absolutely need to fill this position right now, I can take the time, then yeah, I would be focused on just the kind of highest quality. But I've also thought about doing other things, like what if I'm doing this as like an experiment for hiring processes, it's like would be good to maybe benchmark against, like
Hmm.
just track the whole hiring process, and 50% of people automatically, or some percentage automatically, just get an interview, and allow basically randomly chosen, to kind of A/B test my hiring process or whatever there. So yeah, that is one area where I'm
Hmm.
limited in helping companies because I'm not a recruiter, and so I have to stay out of the filtering process there and the actual hiring process. Um, that's maybe one potential opportunity for TokyoDev to expand, but then I'm also taking on a lot more responsibilities, which I don't necessarily want to do now.
That's understandable. You mentioned in the past like the legalities or the the requirements you have to fulfill or things you have to like avoid doing as a job board in Japan. How has navigating that process been for you in terms of like understanding what you have to do or what you shouldn't be doing and making sure you're compliant with all that?
So, okay, I guess that goes back to what I was saying about Japan is a lot
Yeah.
about having a good intention about stuff.
Hmm.
Though technically, if I violate the rules here, I could end up going to jail. I don't think there's any possibility that would actually happen unless I was really doing something malicious there. Normally, what happens with this kind of thing is the worst that's going to happen is you're going to get some sort of warning and asked to change to be compliant there. So I guess my personal process here. Um, okay, one of the good things about Japanese bureaucracy is they tend to be quite accessible. And so, for instance, there's a phone number that we can call and explain our situation with TokyoDev and say, do we need a license if we do this? Or do we need it if we do this other thing there? And so the process for us is basically understanding based on their general guidelines and then kind of confirming with the government that we're still falling within them there for
Yeah,
me not to need a license.
that makes sense. I really want to echo what you just said. It's something I really overlook about Japan versus the US. I don't know about Canada, but the government and the mechanisms of bureaucracy here are incredibly accessible. And it's like, for my disability stuff too, it's so easy to go to your municipal office, find a human being, and be talking to them, explaining, what you like. We all think our situations are unique. Like, I have this and this and this and this, like, so unique, and I'm a perfect snowflake. Nobody could possibly handle this. And they're just kind of like, well, you have that thing. That makes you this box. So, it's that simple. If they don't know, they go talk to some other human being down the like a couple desks away. And it's such a great thing in my mind about being in Japan, especially for taxes, right? Like you run a small business, you have as a foreigner in Japan, you have a house and a family, you have a small business, you have tax implications, and it's just like sometimes you just want to talk to somebody. And sure, you can go to an accountant, but the people at the tax office also know. And it's so easy to take for granted here.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for me, getting an accountant instead of doing things myself was something that ended up saving me money and I should have done earlier. Like if you get the right accountant, if your business is over a certain scale, there's just certain things that you aren't necessarily going to be proactively told. But yeah, no, I think generally here, like as you say, bureaucracy has their processes here, but it's like I've never not been able to accomplish something or been really frustrated with, I guess, with government here. I mean, if anything, it's
Hmm.
more the businesses with their kind of processes that tend to be less accommodating.
Yeah. It's the same thing for immigration, right? Like I've had situations where I take my paperwork to immigration and there's something that changed in the last year. Because I worked for the same employer, but the company itself changed like 3 or 4 times. It was literally the same employer, but the corporate body changed from like a Gome Gaisha to uh Kabashiki Gaisha to an LLP. I forget what the Japanese word. It's like an 8 character long kanji thing. But we had all those changes, and I went to immigration. I'm like, look, I've been employed at the same place. They have these 3 names. Here's an article about how they got sold to Nicho. Like, what do I have to do for my application? And she just looked at it, looked at my whole packet, and she's like, this is fine. Just submit it. Like, they don't care. Like, so it's really reassuring to be able to get that. Like, I've never heard of anybody in the U.S. who is able to get that kind of thing done. Nobody knows the answers.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean that kind of thing is also why I would encourage more Japanese companies to hire international people. Like here, getting a visa for someone is a relatively straightforward process. Doesn't require hiring a specialist, or it doesn't involve a ton of
hmm.
money there. So if you're hiring someone's really skilled, like software developer, is pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And even the legal costs, like I hired a legal scrivener for my permanent residence application just for the peace of mind, and also she did like all the paperwork for me. I had to go to my city hall and get my pension and tax paperwork, I guess. I got the pension stuff from online, but I got the tax paperwork from city hall. And it was only, I say only because it's all relative, but it was about 160,000 yen, right? 16 mon yen. And like that is not an excessive cost for legal services, I think, compared to the US. Like um an ambulance ride in the US can cost more than that. We can put it that way. And so like even for any company that's serious about hiring somebody internationally, hiring a scrivener is not going to break the bank for them comparatively. Um and I think we were talking about this earlier, but like there's this it's an unknown frontier for a lot of companies, right? That makes it scary, and you automatically assume like it must be so hard to do, but in reality, it's just kind of like that.
Yeah, no, that is another area I want to see how TokyoDev can be better at kind of supporting companies there. But at the same time, I kind of wonder because like if a company hasn't already overcome those hurdles themselves, it's maybe they're not going to be successful at hiring people from abroad or whatever there. So it is kind of a filtering mechanism for the companies itself.
It is, and there's both on both sides, right? The people being hired and the company doing the hiring. There is not often a lot of information on cross-cultural communication or cultural integration, let alone professional integration, like somebody who's from a low context culture, a culture that is more used to having everything put explicitly, and a certain kind of feedback mechanism. Like do you say bad things directly, or do you do the sandwich where you like good bad good, or do you just kind of like say it implicitly? Like there's all these different types of communication that can make it really hard to work with somebody that's not from your own culture. And on both sides, the companies and the potential employees, there's not a lot of people equipped to think about or work with that. And it'll just be brushed off, right? It'll be like, this person is hard to deal with. foreigners are hard to deal with, or Japanese companies all suck. They all do this thing. They're also passive aggressive, and there's all these assumptions built in because people don't have a framework or a structure with which they can think about how, like, what is causing a communication issue here, and how can we improve? Like, what can we learn from this? There's a whole like closet industry here, right, of facilitators, and they go around to places like Uniqlo and Rakuten and all these companies that want to convert to speaking English, and they give seminars on how to do this. You know, and so that's another issue, right, for hiring companies. Like they think if I hire a foreigner who speaks Japanese, they'll be able to just like slot right in and we'll work great. There's a lot of twists and turns in the road ahead that people may not be aware of or entirely equipped to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. So we're coming up on the 2 hour mark here.
Hmm.
So I think we'll wrap things up. I If someone didn't get their question answered, I guess they can take it to chat there. I guess we have a number of different channels where you could post your question there. Sorry we didn't get to everyone's question there, but yeah, I want to say thanks to Scott for your time today, and thanks for everyone for listening.
Hmm. Thank you all for coming. I was terrified it was going to be like me and you and maybe like Mission Poplar, and that was going to be it. But yeah, there's questions I asked for in the events channel in my thread that I did not answer here. I'll answer those in text if you have something specific for me. And like Paul said, we have lots of other channels. Um, so thank you for having me, Paul. It was great.
Okay, well, goodbye then, Scott.